I don't drink as a general rule, but once a month or so I'll go out with friends and binge. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in the city, and they left. I was chatting up a cute guy, so I decided to stay. I went back to his place. Post-coitus, very unsatisfying for anyone interested. I'm ready to head home, so I call an Uber to pick me up. I am still determining where I am. I know the city I'm in, but not my exact location. I order the Uber, but it's taking forever, so I cancel it and try again. Pretty soon a car pulls up. I drunkenly mumble, "Is this the Uber?" and hop in. Mistake. Ubers are supposed to have some kind of marking on the vehicle. The guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting. I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're headed on the highway, but in the opposite direction of where I thought we needed to drive, and we're going at a solid 90 mph. Then I get a call from my Uber driver. He's there, and I'm not, because I'm in a car with a fucking nutcase. I start texting my friend, frantically counting off mile markers for her. Then I realize that's not going to help because she's probably drunk too. So I call 911, but I realize this guy is crazy. He's refusing to let me out of the car, so I've got to do it on the sly. It's been 40 minutes now. I'm terrified. I don't know where I am. I don't know who this is. We're driving over 100 mph, weaving in and out of traffic. This guy is trying to get me to hang up my phone call. "Yo, get off the phone. The fuck are you calling? Better not be a snitch." And also smoking pot, so I don't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if it's my friend, praying that they'll catch on. "Hey girl, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past highway exit." "No, sweetie, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. It's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends." Thanks, sweet baby Jesus, the operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends cops, and we develop a code. If I see cops, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out the window, which looks semi-normal because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex, and he busts out some powder and forms 2 lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator, in code. "Oh girl, I wish you were here right now. This guy just busted out the coke. You'd love it. He's taking a really big bump, man, after my own heart," etc. Pretty soon I can see the lights from the cop cars, so I start waving my hand out the window. At this point, I don't care if he's onto me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, but I slump down in my seat just in case things get hot. The cops surround us, get him out of the car, and then, once it's safe, they extricate me as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all this to the officer, I find out that of the guy's 40-ish years on this earth, he's been in federal prison for 30 of them for violent offenses. A close friend and I were on fall break from college and decided to go to an Odessa concert in downtown Chicago. We grew up in the suburbs, so going to Chicago to have fun was common for us. Anyways, we had a great time at the concert and decided to Uber home since we weren't close to the train station. My friend told me Uber wasn't working for him at the moment, so I called Uber. But this was literally my first time calling one, and I accidentally called an Uber pool not knowing what it was. My friend saw that and was like, it doesn't matter. So the driver picks us up from right outside the concert venue. There were a lot of intoxicated people around, as one could imagine post-Odessa show. But we were pretty sober, as all we did was smoke some weed, which we were used to. We get in the car and everything is going normal, but we didn't notice the direction the driver was taking as we were wrapped up in talking about the show. Turns out, the driver was going to the south side of Chicago, which we realized after some time by looking at maps. But our suburb was exactly the opposite direction of this lengthy drive south. We decided to attribute this to the fact that it was an Uber pool and shrugged it off until we picked up this next passenger. TBH, this girl scared us. I don't like to judge people, but she scared us just by looks and how she talked. Once the girl got in, we asked the driver where we were going first, to which he stopped answering. Next thing I know, my phone lit up and said the Uber trip was canceled, and for this duration of the ride, Uber had no record of me being in the car. I asked the driver what the deal was and he didn't answer. The girl and the driver 100% knew each other as they were calling each other nicknames. The girl was weird and seemed to be doing some hand signals to him. Then we proceeded to drive further south to this neighborhood, the sketchiest neighborhood I've ever seen. I didn't realize neighborhoods like this even existed. Every house was completely wrecked. There were no street signs on most streets. Most streetlights were out, flickering. Homeless people lying on sidewalks, and there were beat-down warehouses and alleys. This was by far the scariest area I'd ever seen. No one who cared would hear a scream in this area. Once we started seeing all of this, our hearts dropped because the driver would still not respond to us. My friend then looks over to me and whispers, "We need to get the fuck out of here." To which I replied, "Dude, look where we are." And so we stayed in the car. Then we get driven down this alley behind a warehouse where the streets ended and there were just fields beyond it. The driver is going down this alley at like 2 miles per hour, but keeps going. The girl and Uber driver were discussing something serious, but we couldn't make it out since they were using mostly signals. At that time, our hearts sank even more, and we both thought we were going to be killed in this alley, or at best someone was going to get in the car and rob us. He stopped. The doors unlocked, and I was in complete shock with a pale face when all of a sudden my friend says, "Hey, I'm completely sober and I'm about to fucking call 911. I'm assuming the driver was waiting around the concert to pick up some wasted people to allow this to happen, but we were pretty sober, which he was serious about. He had 911 dialed on his phone. The Uber driver looks back at us in shock after he sees 911 dialed and my friend's finger about to push call. He looks at the girl. The girl is in shock too, and she nods her head no, says, "What the fuck, Rye," the driver's nickname, and gets out of the car. The driver then drives out of the neighborhood and onto the highway towards our suburb. All of a sudden, my Uber app gave me a notification saying we were now in a ride. All of a sudden, the driver starts talking to us again, but he wasn't giving any answers, just saying he was driving us home. We were asking WTF just happened, dude, and he just wouldn't answer stuff like that. He would answer about where we're going, but nothing about what just happened. We got home safely and reported the Uber driver for this ride because it was messed up. We think that the Uber driver was trying to wait for wasted people to call a pool so he could get away with this, but realized we were too big of a risk when it came time to do what they were going to do. We accepted that we were part of a mugging scheme and got lucky we decided to not get drunk at the concert. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build, not tall, not strong, and not threatening in any way, and I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking like 3 drinks, so not incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it was no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed, since I don't know his real name, seemed normal. No red flags. And we make pleasant conversations for about 15 minutes until we are squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From this pleasant conversation, I learn he lives in a certain neighborhood not far from my home. Note that his neighborhood, while relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way on the route we are taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit, or whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice, suggesting I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk, and as I had said, I just had a few drinks, so no need to nap, haha, I'll be home soon enough anyway. He drops it after that, but I still thought it was weird he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway has some weird construction going on, and that the single-lane traffic ahead would make my trip way longer than it needs to be. He asks if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and just wanting to be at home. My partner calls at that moment asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy. and I wanted him to know that someone is expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hang up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet and we get off the highway on a different exit than I've ever used, but I guess that's to be expected on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he says, "My house is only 5 minutes from here." Okay. Pit in my stomach. I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now, a distance enlarged. I'd later learn artificially by his shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighborhood and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead. Blah blah, anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird, and I'm not picking up any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response, and now starts driving on a road in a direction I knew led to my house. Phew. Crisis averted, right? Except not really. 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel more at ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does, very much, so I gush a bit and say, yes, he makes me very happy. Then he asks if I make him happy. I thought that was weird, but humor is my defense mechanism, so I say, well, I should hope so, 8 minutes away. He turns onto a side street and pulls over on the side of the road, looks back at me over his headrest, and asked if I'd make him happy too. I said, what? Mostly because I can't even believe what was happening. He asks again, do you want to make me happy tonight? I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. This street is dark and I don't see any lights on at nearby houses, close to 1 a.m. at this point on a weeknight, and I don't know what the hell this guy has in the car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin falls away from his face, and he says, he doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start. I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home any minute, and besides, I love him. I don't want to hurt him. Can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked and he didn't say another word after that. Just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I say thanks as I get out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess. And that was that. I go into my house and start crying immediately for some reason as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately and tell them what happened so that this guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree, and pull up the app to file the complaint. Except, when I looked at my last ride, the picture in the profile was 100% not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown and wore a turban, maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing happened. This happened to me a few years ago. It was New Year's Eve, and I'd just been out in the city to celebrate with 3 of my closest girlfriends. At the end of the evening, when we were all exhausted and ready for bed, one of our friends traveled to her house near the club, while the others made the hour-long trek back to our home suburb. There were 3 of us together, all females. The trip to our suburb typically involved a 45-minute-long bus trip and then an Uber or taxi to our houses. I have lived in the area my entire life and am very familiar with the most convenient way to get to from my house. On this particular evening, we got off the bus and I booked an Uber with my phone. It was around 4 a.m., so you can imagine our remote town had very little road traffic at this time. A car pulls up at the bus stop, as this was the first car we had seen since arriving, and no one else was around except us. We assumed it was our ride and got in. Our Uber driver was a Russian man with a very thick accent, although he didn't speak a lot. Immediately I noticed that he was taking us in the wrong direction of my house, but I figured it was fine. Sometimes GPS takes drivers on different routes, so I brushed off the thought. Then, 10 minutes later, I get a text message that my Uber driver is arriving at my pickup destination. I looked at the driver beside me, angry that I was too tired or intoxicated to remember the text message you receive before your ride pulls up, but also terrified that I may have gotten my two best friends and myself into a vehicle with a man we didn't know at all. My actual Uber driver then tried to call me, presumably to find out where we were, but I ignored the call, not wanting to alert the man who had picked us up. At that point, I still hadn't said anything to my best friends, but I asked the driver if he will stop at a service station so I can grab a drink of water before we continue the journey, because I felt sick. He questioned me. "We aren't far from your destination now," but I insisted, so he agreed. When we arrived at the service station, I asked my friends to get out with me, desperately, and they obliged. I explained the situation to them, and we all agreed to tell the driver that we were going to walk to a friend's house nearby and not to worry about the rest of the trip. He seemed frustrated and insisted he take us, but we refused to get back in the car. We ended up getting a cab back home from there. That's all we got from today's stories. Let me know what you thought of each individual story. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe because you would not want to miss the next story the Haunted Sketchbook got in store for you.